an island of tranquil beauty some 20 miles square with full employment and 7 distilleries.
Islay, a place of rich history, rugged landscape, rare wildlife, and a whiskey heritage like no other. It's a place of renowned friendliness, beautiful scenery, and over 3,000 years of compressed, waterlogged moss, vegetation, and plants that have grown and died, creating the peat banks of today. There is nowhere else on Earth like it. A quest to find Scotland's best whiskey might bring you to the island. And as many of you find out, Islay is so much more and the very reason why you stay, immigrate, or become returning visitors for years to come.
I thought it was interesting when I started talking to you about, you weren't born here, but you've literally were raised here since
since I was 3
a
years
wee
old.
lad, if you will.
A wee laddie.
A wee laddie, yeah. So talk to me about, what is it like living on the island?
It's pretty carefree. When I was younger, in Scotland we love football. Well, we're terrible at it, but we love it. So I spent most of my childhood out playing with my friends. During summer holidays and whatnot. You'd be out all day, you'd come home to get lunch, to get fed and watered, be back out again. And then really you'd just come home when the person with the football decided to go home.
I'm brought up from Portellan, probably classed as a latchkey kid. You went in from school, you got changed, you went out, you came back for your tea and you went back out again. And the door wouldn't be locked. You would have the neighbours a couple of doors away, and if you would be naughty, they would give you a row. If you weren't being naughty, they might give you a sweetie.
And so to be an Islay, somebody from Islay, you need to have at least 3 generations. So although I have hardly known a day off Islay, not many kids tend to be born on the island, generally again because it's a small place. Medical profession, let's get over to the big hospitals in the mainland. Yeah, born and raised here, I would say, and it's a fantastic place to be.
It's a special place, Islay. I'm not from here originally. I've been on Islay first time I came 10 years ago. Islay has a great pull on people because we're famous for making these wonderful whiskies and great spirit, but there's something about the place. You've got incredible beauty, real beauty, and great community, like really tight community. Folk genuinely are great people, and we've settled well here. We've got 2 little girls here at the school.
It's really quite a worry-free environment to raise kids. And even now, as an adult, I still live here and whatnot. I maybe shouldn't say this on camera, but I don't lock my car. I don't need to worry about locking my house because there's just so much security. Everybody knows everybody. So when I do go to the mainland, for whatever reason, in the car or whatever, I need to really switch on the fact that I'm not on Islay anymore.
From a very early age, I just knew how special Islay is. Again, growing up here, so I went to school just through the trees, just right by this warehouse. There's just something about the closeness of the community. Everyone knows everyone, and in some ways, growing up as a teenager, that can be quite hard when everyone knows what you're up to. But equally, it's a wonderful thing. And now I've got children, raising children here, and you can see the richness of their upbringing.
What is life like on Islay? Horrendous.
Logistical nightmare, challenging, the weather.
No, Islay's a great place to live, but it makes you very resourceful. You have to be. It makes you a good team player because you're on the same boat, I guess.
Life's good. It's changed over the years. It's much more busy with tourism. There's so much work about in Islay. There's not so many unemployed people, which is positive, but the tourists are big part of island life now. We get them most of the year round. It used to be very seasonal in the past. The season would maybe start April, end in October, but there's 10, 11 months a year we've got tourists. It's really busy.
It can be a tough place as well, like summer with midges, ticks, adders, and winter, like you guys have obviously been here a little while and seen like glorious sunshine and great calm spells, and then you see the wind and the rain come in, and it can be challenging with ferries and getting things on and off, but it's part of the magic of the place, I think. I love winter because you just sort of hunker down and get the fire on and pour a good dram maybe, and I think the community is just as strong in the winter as well, because people tend to stick together. So community is a huge part of it. The people that are here make the place, absolutely.
Summertime, it's a tourist hotspot. It's a busy place. You have to plan weeks in advance for anything. If you want to go on holiday, if you want to go out for a meal with your family or whatever, you have to plan quite far in advance. Whereas in winter, it's the opposite. You know, ferries are quiet, restaurants are either closed or quiet. It's two different places.
I came to Ireland first in 1979, and you know, the people are just incredible. They're very friendly and they want to help, and this is a great place to live.
What have we got? We've got 9 distilleries, another 2 getting built, another 1 planning approved. So distilleries have become a big thing in Ireland. 1988 started here, so just to take in context, visitors to the distilleries back then, you would maybe get 100 a year. Now you're looking at over 100 a day sometimes. Whisky Festival Week in Islay, population, I might not double, but it'll be damn near it. There's that many folk coming to Islay. So whisky on Islay is a massive thing.
Islay's famous for its peat whisky. Traditionally, on the north of Islay, Bunnahabhain, Bruichladdich, Killeela are very, very lightly peated. On the south, Laphroaig, Lagavulin and Ardbeg are very heavily peated. Coincidentally, Bowmore sits in the middle of Islay. Our peating levels is in between the north and the south.
We get so many repeat visitors that come to the island 2, 3, 4 times a year, every chance that they can get really. And that's because they found a whisky that they liked, they got really interested in that side of things. They maybe came over a few years ago, but the landscape, the distilleries of course, the people I think are really what make Islay what it is. You know, it's an island that's famous for whisky, but I think that's just the initial draw, that's the hook for people. And it's everything else when you consider on the island that makes them enjoy their experience so much and want to come back.
It's hard to define Islay, right? Because it is unique. Everywhere's unique, right? Yeah. You grew up in somewhere that was unique, and your experience as you grow up. See, the first time I came to Islay as a whisky fan, and like I remember driving this road and getting to the end of this road and seeing Ardbeg. You're like, there's Ardbeg Distillery. That bottle you see, or that you've tried in bars or at tastings. And it's like that all around Islay, and you can see when people are like travelling on the ferry and they look across, like what they're seeing, it's like a pilgrimage. You know, people don't just come here and randomly take a whisky tasting. They're here because they want to be part of it, because these famous spirits right around the world are made here by people and generations of people who've been making it for hundreds and hundreds of years.
We've had folk camp out in Bunnahabhain in January in tents when it's been freezing cold, and you're like, we're really going to stay in a tent at this time of year? I'm from Alaska, this is warm. You know, you're like that, and I'm thinking, and then we've had folk from Chile. I don't know if there's anywhere we haven't had anyone from.
Parts of the island are maybe not huge dramatic mountains. You know, you tend to look over to the Paps of Jura and they're the sort of biggest peaks, but it's got such rugged beauty, but good arable ground as well, so you've got this wonderful mix of landscape.
I like to go for a walk. I like to go down the beach. There's different beaches you can go to, but I've got a favourite down by the airport. It's 7 miles long. Every day you go down there, it's totally different. The wind could be coming from one direction or coming the other one. The sea could be, the tide be going out. It could be flat calm, or the waves could be battering against as well. So every day is totally different.
So how did whiskey start on Islay? Despite centuries of warfare, taxation, and changing economic tides, Islay's resilient population has always kept whiskey making alive on the island.
Every distillery has an amazing history because distilling started as a farming practice. The distilling year was built around farming, you know. Grow a bit of barley, what was left after distilling, you know, you'd feed to your cattle. It's this balance of draft to feed your cows, barley that you're growing, you know, and through the winter and that you would do some distilling.
17th, certainly by the 18th century, whiskey was something that was brewed on small farms. I think it was just a cottage industry, if you like. You had a farm, you were growing barley and wheat, you had plenty of water, and actually the easiest brew to make is beer. You just have to add some yeast and warm it, and you've virtually got a beer. The next stage of actually distilling it, of heating it up enough to get the vapour off and then cool that down into whiskey, into a spirit. I don't know who invented that, but whoever cottoned onto it here on Islay. If you go to the Kilhoman distillery, they've got a map of 30 plus farm distilleries. Very small ones, few were doing more than enough for themselves and their workers and their neighbours. It would just be something you did.
It was something every family, every community had an own still and so on to make their own spirit.
So each house would have something like that, and again, they would be a new make coming off. They'd put it in jugs.
In jugs, in everything which was suitable for holding liquid. But it wasn't common to have it in wood.
Yeah.
That was a very late phase they started with.
Sometime in the last part of the 18th century, 1750s onwards, some enterprising people realised that they could actually do this on a larger scale and sell it. So our first distillery, I think, was probably Bowmore in the 1760s, 1770s. Enterprising man said, you know, if I've got a bit of land, I can actually get people to grow the barley for me. We'll use peat to roast the barley, and that gives you the flavour, and the more peat you use, the stronger the flavour, and on Islay that's a speciality.
David Simpson was the founder of Bowmore Distillery way back in 1779, and he built the distillery 11 years after the village of Bowmore was planned. So he was also the postmaster, he had various other jobs, but most of all he was the distiller. So he started it all way back in 1779.
Ourselves and Lefroy were 1815, we were founded in Lagavulin in 1816. You had the Excise Act 10, 12 years later came in. That's when you sort of saw mass legalisation, or people thinking, right, we could do something commercially.
More and more entrepreneurs starting up distilleries, small families passing it on, and gradually growing. So Bowmore was followed by a number of others, and they were all small family concerns until some of the big multinationals came along. Diageo bought up Kalila and Lagavulin and Port Ellen, Remy Martin, who owns Bruichladdich. So it's gradually gone the way of really big worldwide business.
Some really, really great times. I mean, 1880s, things were really very good. You had big volumes going out here, big volumes going out, and there's records of Ardbeg making its way to the States right up to Prohibition. You know, casks of Ardbeg, people knew it was a great liquid.
Ian Hunter was the last kind of member of the Johnson family to own it, and he's the one that set Lefroy up for success. He was one with the vision. You know, when Prohibition came along, and it must have been pretty horrendous, he didn't accept it. You know, he jumped on a plane, flew out to the US and introduced Lefroy as a medicinal. It had medicinal purposes and powers, I guess. Lefroy continued to be exported to the US through Prohibition, and it was prescribed by doctors.
Industry was going great guns. 70 was a great, we obviously had a blip through the wars, but through the 70s, really, really good time. And then the 80s came.
With the surging worldwide demands for lighter spirits such as vodka, and the change in taste from big and peaty to light and delicate blended whiskeys, a new trend was emerging. So how did this affect Islay distilleries?
When the 70s, the whole industry had made a lot of spirit. Brown spirits became very unfashionable, early 80s, and the industry crashed. It completely crashed. Now, we lost so many buildings here through the 80s. Our warehouse numbers are 3, 9, 10, 10X and 11. What happened to the rest of them? They were flattened in the 80s. Housing was flattened here because the industry was on its knees.
You moved here in 86. I think that's pretty much, I mean, look, we're talking about Ardbeg and some of these other distilleries that were literally mothballed during that time.
They were indeed. The 80s was not a good time at all. Ardbeg closed down really for quite a long time. Port Ellen was mothballed, with the result that when they dig out some old barrels that they found, they reach astronomical sums of money, especially Ardbeg recently.
We shut from 81 to 89, completely turned the place off and stopped. We were silent for that whole time, mothballed, and in 1987 the distillery was sold to Allied, and at the time Allied distillers had Lefroy, and Lefroy was their pride and joy. So they would run Lefroy, and we just were used for a bit of warehousing. Maybe if you needed the odd part here and there, you could come in and strip it. And a lot of the guys here remember it. 89, the distillery got going again, and it would only run 2 months of the year. So you would distill, normally springtime, I don't know, March, April, May, you would do some distilling, and the rest of the time we were shut. And that continued right through the 90s, only 2 or 3 months a year, just production, just tick over.
It was quite a hard business. Whiskey was taxed very high in these days as well, and the cost of staff was immense. So it was a very risky business in these days. Ardbeg was closed because it wasn't good enough for investors to put their money in.
Port Ellen was an unemployment black spot in the 80s. Within Strathclyde, it was 30-40% unemployment. In a village of only 1,000, 1,200 people, but that really mattered. And there were job creation schemes run to give people work, building stone dikes and things like that, just to relieve the unemployment.
You know, going back to the 70s and even the early 80s, people were put off by the medicinal, strong, sort of salty, briny character. And maybe then the distillers realised that they just need to tone it down a bit, make it a little bit more acceptable.
In 1994, Bruichladdich was closed. Our then owners, White and Mackay, deemed us as being surplus to requirements. So we were then closed, or mothballed is the official term, for the next 7 years. At that time we had, I think, around 15 people working for us, most of whom were then unfortunately left jobless. So it was not only a really negative time for the distillery and for the village of Bruichladdich, but for this whole area of Islay as a whole, because one of the main sources of safe, secure employment had unfortunately been lost.
And then came the single malt revival. There was a growing interest globally in traditional drinks that were bold and distinctly tied to a sense of place. Suddenly, Islay was on the rise again.
We were shut and then limited production right till 1996, and then the decision was made to sell Ardbeg. Lots of interest. Glenmorangie bid. At the time, Glenmorangie were owned by MacDonald and Muir. They were still a family-owned company, and in 1997 the deal was done. £7.7 million. An absolute bargain. About 5 million of that was stock. The rest was for the distillery and the brand. The place was a wreck. The place was in a really, really bad way.
When Bruichladdich was, I guess, mothballed and then brought back in early 2000s, they hired everybody back.
Yeah, and I think in a distillery you know that, you can see what it is you're producing. So there's many layers to that as well, but you know, thinking about Bruichladdich, so like you're right, when it was brought back to life back in 2000, 2001, the team who'd made whiskey there in the 90s, if they hadn't retired or passed on, they came back. One of them, is a great example, was the late Duncan McGilvery, sadly missed. He used to joke that he'd had more comebacks than Frank Sinatra because the distillery had been closed down so many times, but each time he would come back. And again, this is like through the 70s, through the 80s, when you had to be resourceful. Again, that's again part of the thing about living on an island here, you become really resourceful. So Duncan was a mechanic, he was an engineer, he'd run his own garage in the shed in the back of his house, so when he wasn't working there, he had something else to go to, he had skills. But each time he came back, there's something about Bruichladdich that gets under your skin, the fact that the way we do things, that traditional way of doing things, that was there. So he would come back, and the other team would come back.
Bit of investment, we got volumes going again, churned over. We get to the sort of mid-noughties, and we've started getting a bit of stock laid down from 98, 97, 98 when we got going again. So we start the Peat pathway where we do, a very young whiskey that's only 6 years old and a still young, almost there, Renaissance, right up to when we get to Renaissance, and then the 10-year-old becomes part of the core range in 2008. LVMH by Glenmorangie in the mid-2000s, 2005, 2006, and we just go from strength to strength.
You look at all the employment that's created by the distilleries. Distilleries pay good salaries. Folk want to get into distilleries, they want to work in distilleries. And on the back of that, if you just look at the production side, you've got production, but the tourist industry on the back of the distilleries now is massive. That has created, I don't want to say a monster in the back of it, but it's created a secondary industry. So you've got this whole tourist industry that's based now in the back of making whiskey. Ourselves, Bunnahabhain, we've invested in putting in a new visitor centre. I mean, when I started, we didn't have a tour guide. We then took a tour guide on for a couple of weeks in the summer, started seeing more and more people. And then through the years to now, I think the visitor centre at Bunnahabhain has 7 or 8 people employed. You take that round all the rest of the distilleries in Islay, and there's a whole secondary industry now on the back of making whiskey. That then feeds into the whole of the island. So you've got hotels required, you've got bed and breakfast required, you've got guest houses, you've got people to service all these. So all that creates a demand.
As we see the growth now and where we are now, like we're record volumes again, we've doubled the still house, but quality has to remain king. Because you can expand, but you have to be bang on with quality. You can make extra Ardbeg, but if it's not tasted like Ardbeg, you're no making Ardbeg. We've come right in a full circle, and today when we're standing in that new still house, huge investment. You think how far this place has come from when that door was shut in 1981, and they thought, that's Ardbeg closed for 8 years. So it's had such an amazing history, but here we are, and we're distilling, and the place and the future's bright, so it's a really exciting time.
In 2012, we were taken over by Remy Cointreau, the French company. In all honesty, Jeff, a lot of people at that point thought, both fans of ours that had loved the way that we'd done things over the years, and even staff of the distillery at the time feared that it would be the beginning of the end of that era of Bruichladdich, you know, because we did things in such a unique way that didn't really make sense on a balance sheet. I mean, we could easily completely change operations here, replace people with machinery, we could go through a whole cost-cutting effort. But thankfully, Remy's own philosophy is very much centred around the importance of people and you know, terroir. It was a perfect relationship, as it turned out in the end. I think people were just fearful, given, I think you hear it a lot in both the whisky industry and well, a number of other industries. When a large business swoops in for a small independent, that they come in, they make changes from the bottom to the top, and it becomes a money-making machine. But we've been really lucky with the fact that Remy themselves appreciate that we're the experts when it comes to making whisky. The most simple terms possible, we still have a real sense of independence, but we now have huge financial backing behind us as well. So that's a really good balance for us going forward. At the moment, we're the biggest employer on the island, and we have over 80 members of staff working at the distillery every single day, over 100 in total, if you also take into consideration our Glasgow office. So over 80 people working on in one distillery on an island of just over 3,000 is a huge number, and something that we're really proud of.
With the expansion of distilleries across the island, is the growth sustainable?
Now, every enterprise on the island is looking for staff. Distilleries are, certainly the hospitality trade, are very short of people. We have this problem of where are they going to live, because there's an awful lot of second homes here and an awful, well over 130, I think was the last count I saw, of Airbnbs, of people letting their properties, and you can't criticise them for trying to earn money from their property. The distilleries are still vitally important to us, but personally I think that if there was a big downturn, it wouldn't affect us as badly as it did in the 80s and 90s. That really was a bad period.
Well, I think the last I heard on Islay was there's 0.3% unemployment. So actually getting people to come, I mean, in good roles at distilleries, getting people to come and have enough people on the island to service all the jobs is getting harder and harder. I've employed this year, I think it's 6 or 7 new employees, and all the people we're employing are actually probably have other jobs. There's no one I've employed that's been employed, so I've taken someone from working somewhere else. So they've then had to go and backfill that position, or we've lost people to other distilleries and then we've had to backfill that position. So there's only a finite amount of people on the island, so unemployment's really low. It's great for the economy. It has a detrimental effect in that we have a pool that maybe other people don't. Distilleries, great for employment, great for the island. I mean, you look at Islay itself, 9 distilleries running here, making, I don't know, probably high teens, early 20 million litres of alcohol produced on one island a year. Massive investment for the whole industry in Ireland.
You see, if the money which is made here on Ireland would stay here, we had gold-plated roads. And you've seen the roads here, the infrastructure is terrible. Housing is a big problem, but I think we are getting there. Some changes are on their way, but nevertheless, it's big money business, and you never know how long it will last.
You make really good money, right, owning a place and renting it out for tourism almost, 6 months, 8 months out of the year. But then I can think of myself, like, I just think about this new distillery open up, right, and it brings 50, 60 jobs. how is that pose problems?
Well, that's the flip side of it. It's not a unique problem to Islay. It's something that a lot of places that are remotely touristy suffer from. But yeah, it is a big issue. Housing's a really big problem at the moment. There's more job opportunities now in Islay, career opportunities for young people than there's ever been. Accommodation, on the other hand, and actually having housing for people who are going to be living and working and contributing to the island every day, that's something where there's probably not enough yet. I think as locals we understand that there is a need for holiday homes and tourist accommodation because, as I said, they support the economy in such a major way, but there has to be a balance where there's enough housing, enough accommodation for tourists, of course, but we need to take care of our own and ensure that there's enough places to stay for young people who are living here. And at the moment there's a bit of an imbalance there, I think, and it's causing the housing prices to go up as well. And
quite a lot of the jobs are really summer jobs, and the school children benefit from that because they can be guides and reception people. Full-time jobs, though, still pop up in the distilleries, keep getting advertised in our local newspaper. And the big new distillery that's going up, they are more or less committed to building houses for their staff.
That's great.
As, of course, the previous distilleries did. Bunnahabhain used to have a big group of houses that were built in the 40s or 50s, like a village for the people employed in the distillery. But they just fell empty because the number of people employed in the distillery fell hugely.
But I think there's big changes needed, and I think it's a great thing when you think about, again, I've lived in this island for almost 40 years, and I remember what it's like when there was distilleries closed down, like ourselves in Ardbeg, there's no whiskey being made. And you can see the benefits as Ardbeg comes online, and Bruichladdich comes online, and Ardnahoe and Kilhoman you can see the benefits. And actually, growing up here now, I left the island because I didn't know what I wanted to do and what the opportunities were. Off you go to see the big wide world. But a lot of people don't want to do that. You can see there's good opportunities, good careers in here, not just in terms of making whiskey, but particularly for ourselves in terms of marketing. Everything we do is at the distillery, so there's so many different skills you can develop staying here, which is fantastic. The tourism has taken off. People welcomed into distilleries, the interest in distilling, which again is fantastic, and we don't want to take anything away from that. So you can see today, the prosperous nature of the island is fantastic, and when you've seen it the other way, you want it to be like this. Yeah. But with that comes problems, and it needs investment in infrastructure, in the roads, in the ferries, and all of these kind of things, and it's all coming. But housing, it's a huge issue. There's always issues alongside these kind of things. Preserving what's good about Islay as well, that small community, that kind of nice kind of thing. There's changes, but then things are always changing. Things are always evolving.
Some of the difficult jobs to fill are those that are relatively low paid because the distilleries pay more. We have a postal service here, and they're struggling to find postmen, post ladies, to deliver the mail. And two who were on the rounds have recently gone to work for Bruichladdich at a better salary. Okay, it ought to raise the salaries all over the island, and that can only be good. But this is probably why our postal people are going to be on strike this week for a day. And you do really feel for them. It's very difficult when you can't offer them a lot of money. Can you keep them?
But will the lessons of more than 200 years of highs and lows of Islay whiskey ensure that the same mistakes won't happen again? Tastes and trends change, and the demand for Islay's whiskey can fall just as fast as it can rise.
That's what I can't understand. I'm like, this island, 25 miles you can get across it, and 9 distilleries on it, but yet, like you just said, it's like Bunnahabhain, you could taste it. I can line them up, and I'm not saying I'm a taste tester by no reason, but you could tell the difference. Or at least you're like 9 Islay whiskeys on the table, try boom, boom, boom. They're all different.
They're all different. Yeah. They're all different, and they're all from the one place. And we've all built our own characters. We all work in that character. For a while, our marketing phrase was the gentle giant of Islay. We weren't running flat out. We weren't going Hemingway, but we were doing this mild, lowly peated, very sweet, very fruity whiskey. If you come back to the New Mate Spirit, it's got floral tones, it's got vanilla, and that's what we get. So the flavours of Bunnahabhain are unique to Bunnahabhain, but as a whole, we're an island, and the island's probably greater than any one individual distillery. So folk come to Islay because it's a whiskey region, but most folk learn it's going to be peated. Off the top of my head, I can think of 5 of the distilleries that have actually produced unpeated. So we're known for doing peat, but we don't all do peat, and even the ones that are known for doing peat don't have peat all the time.
One of the things that I decided early on was that we needed a uniqueness, a point of difference. You know, don't build a distillery like every other distillery in Scotland. You know, what are you trying to prove there? Try and have something that captures people's imagination. And that was why we came up with this idea of building it on a working farm where we could grow some of the barley and then control every aspect of production through the distillery. And I think that captures people's imagination because provenance, traceability is something that everybody's interested in now, whatever you're buying.
So this whiskey was made in 2009, so you know, I was here, I was part of that. I could even have distilled it, you know, I don't know. But I know that some of the whiskies we're making today that I will be laying down for future generations. And that's something that, you know, it keeps you really honest about the passion and the quality of that spirit, so that I know I'm standing here today working with whiskies that were laid down by again, people who are no longer with us, people who've passed on. And the example and dedication that they set, and that's taught me how to make whiskey. That transition all the way through, that handing down from generation, when we talk about how we make our whiskey, nobody has any qualifications. Nobody has a bit of paper to say that they are signed off to work at Bruichladdich Distillery. Budgie, still been here since 1989, he taught me how to run the stills. And there was just a moment where he kind of stepped back and you could do it, and that's happened with so many people. So there's this lovely thing where it's about this generational passing on of the skills, the tradition of making whiskey, because we make whiskey the same way as we do in 1881. You build all that in, how could you not want to be part of that? You know, how could you not want to be part of Bruichladdich Distillery, part of that history? Because again, it goes outside the gates of the distillery. It's the people you see as a young kid, the guys you look up to.
You know, here on Islay, the 80s was a very bad time, and there are still people on the island who are scared it might come again. We've got new distilleries. We're now up to 12, I think, with at least 2 being thought about or talked about. And people are saying, oh, what if there's another slump? It's going to be terrible. On the other hand, the number of people employed by the distilleries is a fraction of what it used to be, with the exception of Bruichladdich. So from the time when you would have, yes, 50 plus people at every distillery employed by the distillery, not least digging peat, you're now down to low tens. If there was a slump, it's not going to be quite the economic disaster in terms of unemployment that it was then.
People think it's all very laid back and a very slow pace, but people work hard here, you know, and I think lots of people have sort of found their way in life through different industries or working, through farming, through distilling, fishing, and I think people have sort of made their way and found their place on Islay over hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years. And I think what that gives you is this great melting pot of people and history and people who are so linked to the place and the place names and their family roots here that it's a really, really special place.
I think whiskey is the thread that leads through all of that, you know, because it's so important to the community here and the whole life here. You know, if there wasn't whiskey, what would Islay be like? You know, it'd be a really, really different place. Be a bird sanctuary probably, which would be wonderful for the birds, but yeah.
We've got to think of the last generation, the generation before them. They made that fantastic whiskey and they've handed the tradition down from generation to generation, and hopefully we're going to teach the next generation and they carry on as well.